Why is no one talking about human fuel? Everyone seems to be talking about fuel for machinery. No one seems to be talking about fuel for humans and how it's going to be affected in this war. Let's talk about it. It says here 25 to 35% of global nitrogen fertilizer passes through the Strait of Hormuz, is primarily destined for major agricultural regions in Asia, South America, and North America, according to reports from early 2026. The urea and ammonia originate from producers in the Persian Gulf, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE and Iran. Key destinations and importers for these shipments. India is heavily reliant on these shipments for their domestic fertilizer, particularly to sustain their agricultural. Booty call. Ladies, stop. It's Ramadan. Haram. Sorry. Brazil imports substantial volumes of Middle Eastern urea to support their massive soybean and corn production. United States, while a producer, the U.S. is not immune to these disruptions as a significant portion of its urea traveled through this corridor. So, everyone has been talking about oil prices, fuel prices, how much oil is going to go up. No one's talking about how people on this side of the world are not going to have fertilizer to get food or oil for the human body. India seems to be on the side of Israel. India seems to love Israel, and from a few conspiracy theorists, after this war, India is going to be replaced with America is going to be replaced with India as Israel's number one trading and domestic partner. They have nukes. They have 3 times the population of the United States and a bunch of other shit. But India is heavily reliant on all the fertilizer that's coming in through the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran has shut that shit down. So, what does farming look like for Indians, and what does food shortage look like in 2 years? Does that mean India is now going to start importing for their 2 billion people? Or what is the story? I don't know. I haven't heard a single person talk about fertilizer shortage and the possibility of how it's going to affect people in the world. Brazil needs that fucking soybeans to sell to China and other places. They need this to grow the soybean. Like, this war is going to fuck up more than just Iran. But my thing is, no one's talking about food. Food.
You can't say no one. We've been talking about it for the longest. But who listens to the prophets? This is second Ezra 15:1. Behold, speak thou in the ears of my people the words of prophecy, which I will put in thy mouth, saith the Lord. And the Lord's been putting these words in our mouths, starting off with our elders and even their elders for decades. 5+ decades. Brothers been out there telling you what's to come, telling you World War III is going to happen, telling you you're going to get chipped. That's something a lot of people not talking about either, but hey, the prophet's been telling you about it, as it is also written in 2 Chronicles 36. The prophets were sent B times to warn you. But the scriptures say how the prophets were pretty much not set by. They misused the prophets. As a matter of fact, that's what the scriptures say. The prophets were misused. So it says, and cause them to be written in paper, for they are faithful and true. So what we say is faithful and true because we come out of the scriptures, all right, which is essentially the mouth, the words of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. Fear not the imagination against thee. Let not the incredulity of them trouble thee that speak against thee. Right? Because this thing of ours is about faith. And again, I bring out the point of how we were sent out B times. Meaning, before things were seen hell even felt to have happened, the prophets were sent out. And that's heavy in itself, being at the fact that now it's obvious. It's obvious what's happening in the world. But there was a point of time back in the 70s, the 80s, when things weren't so obvious. Right? When there was a time of peace, that when there was a time of prosperity, the apostles and again their elders have been speaking on, when I say the apostles, I'm talking about the leaders of our group, Great Millstone. All right, so this is 2 Chronicle 36 and 15, and I'll read it in the NLT. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, repeatedly sent his prophets to warn them, for he had compassion on his people and his temple. All right. And in the KJV, it says, and Yahweh, God of their fathers, sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes and sending. And that word betimes, as I mentioned before, is an adverb meaning early, seasonably, or in good time, often implying doing something before it is too late or promptly. It is synonymous with early, promptly, seasonably, and speedily, and is commonly found in literature and older texts to describe starting tasks or waking up early. So in other words, he sent his prophets out early. All right. In the morning time. When I say in the morning time, I'm talking about when I say in the morning time, Salakia, I'm talking about years prior to. Whereas right now, being in the end, we are closer to midnight, closer to destruction. Right? But in the morning time, that's early, hours before midnight. All right? If you put it in that terms, it says, but they mocked the messengers of God, the prophets, and despised his words and misused his prophets until the wrath of Yahweh arose against his people, till there was no remedy. And in the NLT, it says, but the people mocked these messengers of God and despised their words. They scoffed at the prophets until the Lord's anger could no longer be restrained and nothing could be done. So we're at the time, going back into 2 Ezra 15, where it says, fear not the imagination against thee. Let not the incredulity of them trouble thee that speak against thee, which will happen. All right, we just read that the prophets were misused. They were despised. And then what happens after, the misuse, the despisal, the contempt of the words of the Lord? For all the unfaithful shall die in their unfaithfulness. So now the Lord is bringing famine to your doorstep. Behold, saith the Lord, I will bring plagues upon the world, the sword, famine, death, and destruction. And before I continue, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai. Yahweh is who the world ignorantly calls God. Yahweh Shai is his son, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, and there's no God beside them. Thank you, or the water, which that's how you, Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai is in Hebrew, the ancient Paleo Hebrew. Okay, the water is another word in the Hebrew, which is the language of the heavens. That means thank you. All right, for allowing me to do another lesson. Double honors to my teachers, the elder apostles, and the elder bishops of Great Millstone for being faithful witnesses to the Holy Spirits. All right? The Holy Spirit of Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai. Right? Passing down understanding to us, which can in return pass down understanding to those who have ears to hear. And double honors to the and shalom to the elect, whom the Lord hath given the ears to hear. All right, so reading on in 2 Ezra 15, behold, I will bring plagues upon the world, the sword, famine, death, and destruction. You know, and that food shortage, oil and food shortage brings a lot of pain, brings a lot of death. Because what moves without oil? Prescription, medication, medical supplies, that all moves using oil. Liquid natural gas. You know, without that, you have no electricity. In which case, you can't perform surgeries and people die. So the Lord is bringing, he's having judgment creep up on you. You know. Then it says famine, death, and destruction. All right, so death can be interpreted, or it can come in many facets. And this video is to describe one of which being the famine. Now, I saw this article where it says Americans are about to get a crash course in the global economy. Hell, and that's pun intended. This place is falling. And these people are about to crash and burn. You know? Hey, all that vacationing, all that, you know what I'm saying, partying and bullshitting, that's just coming to an end. And with food being, you know, coming to a scarcity, you know, happy time is, as far as, you know, because, you know, people go on vacation, they get the all-inclusive resort where you eat and drink as much as you want, you know. Or, you know, the holidays come around, whatever, the carnivals, where you just frolic, you know, eat, like I say, eat and drink at your leisure. That shit's coming to an end. You know, in accordance to the holidays, that shit's, hell, shit's getting too expensive to be, you know, putting out a major feast like that. And that's beautiful. Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai is judging this world. And you ask, why would the Lord be judging this world? Well, you don't know the scriptures. The Lord hates evil. All right? The Lord hates abominations, which this place pushes. All you can eat shrimp, all you can eat crabs, adultery. Right? This place pushes that. Homosexuality. It says, it's not just about oil. It says vital supply chains are at a near standstill. All of these cost increase could not have come at a worse time for the agricultural industry, a Tennessee farmer said. Tennessee farmer Todd Littleton is thousands of miles from the Strait of Hormuz, but he's seeing the early fallout from a shipping lane's effective closure. Is fighting as fighting continues in and around Iran. The turmoil couldn't have come at a worse time as planting season starts. Littleton has 4,000 acres for corn, wheat, and soybeans. Now he's facing an unplanned $50 per acre increase in the cost of nitrogen, a critical fertilizer for his corn crop. Diesel fuel is up 50 cents a gallon, he said, and the natural gas used to heat the Gibson County farmers' poultry houses is more expensive too. To put it in perspective, the increase in fertilizer and fuel could mean costs means it will cost me an additional $100,000 to plant corn this year. It will be difficult for Littleton to fully absorb those costs, he said, noting that net losses have been at record levels across farm country during the last 3 years. All of these cost increases could not have come at a worse time for the agricultural industry. He told Market Watch, "We love to do what we do on farms, keeping people fed, clothed, and moving. But we have to be able to make ends meet so we can keep operating." Americans are about to get a crash course in the global economy. And it's not just about oil supply. Rising costs for fertilizer, feed, packaging, and shipping are going to seep into the prices that people see on grocery shelves. The price of oil is catching a lot of attention from the investors and everyday drivers. Indeed, a gallon of gas costs $1 per gallon more than it did last month. On Friday, Brent crude oil for May delivery traded at over $110 a barrel. And this is just the beginning stages. There's going to come a time to where things are going to change by the day, as this war ramps up, and various crews, oil, boats are being destroyed, and we got to factor in, other canals where boats are able to come through are drying up. That's also not being spoken on. It says, yet fertilizers is the deeper story, as around 1/3 of globally traded fertilizers typically moves through the Strait of Hormuz, said Jake Hanley, Chief Growth Officer and Director of Investments at Tariqium. I don't know how you say that word. Tariqium. The Persian Gulf isn't just an oil region, he said. It's the nitrogen supply chain. Nitrogen is essential for plant growth. Middle East urea, a widely used nitrogen fertilizer, has climbed over 50% in value since the start of the year. It says jumping down, major fertilizer producers and exports are currently blocked behind the Strait of Hormuz, said Linville. That includes 3 of the world's 10 largest urea exporters, Iran, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. NOLA urea, a major benchmark price for fertilizer at the Port of New Orleans trading hub, has climbed sharply in recent weeks. The U.S. and Israel strikes on Iran have happened to coincide with the start of the planting season in America. And we know that nothing happens by chance. Yahweh Shem Yahweh Shai is squeezing this place out, choking this place out. All right? Hitting them where it hurts. As we just read, the sword, famine, death, and destruction. Timing matters for American farmers because purchasing, field preparation, and early season fertilizer applications are already underway. It says, wrote Faith Perrum, economist at the American Farm Bureau Federation. In a report earlier this month, that means farmers have limited ability to adjust if input prices spike suddenly. And while there are many options that may help alleviate the virtual halt in the passage of oil tankers through the strait for fertilizer, there's no pipeline bypass, no strategic reserve, no quick fix. Consumers are learning fast about the macroeconomic consequences of the war in Iran. Hey, this is a very strategic war by Iran. as brothers was going into last night in Dallas, Iran is not necessarily going head up because they know they can't, but they are hitting them tactically, and that's very, very smart. It says consumers are learning fast. Okay, we read that. For the first time in at least a year, Americans said global conflict, not inflation, was their top concern, according to an early March sentiment gauge for Numerator. Oh, and we can't forget, because that's another thing that Trump is trying to force the Fed to lower interest rates, right? So you got interest rates going up, you got inflation going up because they're printing a lot of money for this war. You got job production, which pretty much goes into GDP, what a country produces, all right, is going down. So this all leads to a very, 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 very expensive society to live in. It says, which grocery prices are poised to increase? Gas pumps and grocery stores are two places where shoppers are keenly aware of prices. Food shoppers have already seen a slow creep higher recently. The cost for a basket of food was up 2.6% year over year in February. It says the grocery industry was already absorbing the Trump administration's steel and aluminum tariffs, which increased the cost of cans and certain bottling materials, said Phil Lempert. Now, higher oil prices will increase the cost of plastic packing and films coming from petrochemicals, he said, while higher fertilizer costs will also feed into prices. The result is more expensive packaging, Salakia, and center stores categories like canned vegetables, soups, and beverages. All right, so now it gets into the specifics. Shoppers could pay 15% more by the fall for coffee, tea, and chocolate. Experts expect more pressure as the global duty applies across many origins. There's a page on YouTube. It's called Epic Economist. He's always going into that, the cost of food and the downturn of shipments. It says bananas, mangoes, pineapples, and off-season berries and vegetables are all exposed to higher input costs. Yeah, man, so everything's going up. All right? The everything crisis. And the scriptures say, right, it says, 2nd Ezra 15, jumping down to verse 13, they that till the ground shall mourn, for their seeds shall fail through the blasting and hail, and with a fearful constellation. This verse is from 2nd Ezra, as we read, 2nd Ezra 15, 13, depicting an apocalyptic scene of agricultural collapse. It warns that farmers will grieve as crops fail, ruined by blight, hail, and a fearful constellation, which implies severe, divinely ordained climate disturbance or cosmic plagues. Oh, and that's another thing. We coming in, to hurricane season, droughts. Hey, one thing about droughts is that they can cause spontaneous fires. And that's something else we are bound to see this winter time. The summertime. Normally it happens in California, but the way the Lord doing things, I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing things in the Midwest. It's getting bad. It's going to be very bad out here. And as this place falls, we should be increasing our faith because we seeing that the Lord is working his work. All right. And this is the most important commodity as the money is failing. And let's say even if you did have a couple million in the bank, you were a person that's able to generate a high amounts of income. What does it really matter if what you really need to survive is not there? Which is food, heat in the wintertime, stuff like that. Yeah, man, so this is the most important commodity, and it should be going up. And as always, I pray, I was saying over here at Great Millstone is to keep believing, keep praying, keep doing what you have to do in hopes of mercy when the Lord, drops the hammer. That he puts you behind him, while he's destroying the wicked in front of him. But it says, then it says, they that till the ground shall mourn. We read that. Woe to the world, and them that dwell therein. Hell, I'm saying this in every lesson. I'm going to keep saying it. Because the world is getting touched. It's not just about living in America or leaving America, which economically a lot of people do because it's too expensive for the rent and so on and so forth. But now, wherever you've moved to, prices are going to start being hiked up over there. Because it's a simple process of supply and demand. There's high level of demand being at this high level of demand and there's less supply, you're going to have to pay for it. Right? And it's going to come to a point, like I did a lesson on this years back in Venezuela, where certain companies, certain supermarkets had to close down because, when you're selling things at a loss, it's affecting you. And at that point, you're not in business. You're pretty much giving things out at the cost of your pockets. And we already understand. You must know that, as a business owner, you can't do that and still survive. You got your own bills to pay. But then it goes into for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands. Because with these wars and the throwback or the fallback of these wars, people are going to take to the streets for their disapproval. At the same time, you have this partial government shutdown, which is affecting flights, affecting various governmental jobs. And, people are blaming it on their government officials. For there shall be sedition among men and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. So these people are about to feel the squeeze even more, which caused them to react sporadically and lunatically. And, just as they did with these various riots, Jay go out there and loot and burn, break shit down. The whole world is going to be on fire. So that was it. Shalom to the elect.